Welcome to the groundbreaking news program that delves into the heart of Mormonism, your weekly window into the unique intersection of news, history, and culture that resonates with the tapestry of Mormonism. So whether you're tuning in from the heart of Utah or joining us from around the world, your favorite news program starts now, where news meets insight and the stories of our faith unfold.
Spencer Kimball, back when the church was true.
I was having flashbacks to all the conferences and firesides of my young life. Yep, I was having a flashback.
It's all
right. All I could picture was these soft, plentiful kisses on the side of D. Michael Quinn's cheeks. So, welcome everybody to the Mormon Newscast. It is January 6th, 2025. I am joined by my esteemed colleagues, Rebecca Biblioteca and Radio Free Mormon. How are the both of you?
I'm great. Thank you. How are you, Rebecca?
I'm fabulous, and Happy New Year. It's 2025. Has anyone had to write it out on anything yet? I haven't.
Yes, I have.
Failed.
And it worked like a charm, but I focused on it.
Yeah,
if I'm not thinking about it, then I'm sure I'll revert to 24.
Yeah, I did that. So,
well, folks, we do have a great show lined up for you. This is the dark days ahead for BYU staff, which is the main story. Radio Free Mormon will be covering that. So the Purge at BYU begins again. And the next story we'll have is who are the baddies? Are we the baddies? Who's the baddies? And then next, and I'll be covering that. Who's leaving the church? Who's staying? That's Rebecca Biblioteca. I've got another story. The widow's might got mightier. And then Rebecca has a story for us, another church cartoon kerfuffle. So let's go to our lead story, Mr. Radio Free Mormon.
Very interesting. I don't know if we're the baddies, but if the TBMs are the socias, we're the greasers. All right. Today, breaking news at the Salt Lake Tribune. Peggy Fletcher Stack gives this huge story. It's a huge story. And it's an important story. It's huge in that way. It's also huge in the research that she had to do in the story in the weeks that she's put into it, obviously. It's titled and headlined, Dark Days, New Rules Have BYU Professors Running Scared. Clark Gilbert, the church's education commissioner, is determined to have faculty members who support the faith's teachings, or at least how his office interprets those teachings. Going into the story now, I gave a separate slide here for Peggy Fletcher Stack because she really did a lot of work on this, and I've hinted at that before. It'll become obvious throughout. If you want to read the entire story, please go there, read the entire story. But it is a very long story. There's a lot of investigative journalism that she did into this story. And I'm just picking here and there to try and give the highlights of the story. It will be long enough, even picking here and there. So she starts off by saying, midway through Jeffrey R. Holland's hotly disputed musket speech, in which he admonished Brigham Young University's faculty to take up metaphorical arms in defense of the faith's opposition to same-sex marriage, the Latter-day Saint apostle pointed to a less familiar face. So in the middle of this address, Elder Holland points to a less familiar face, and that's Clark Gilbert. He's what this whole article is really about. Clark Gilbert, the church's budding new commissioner of education and his traveling companion for the day. And I went back and I clipped the part about the musket speech from the musket speech. And then I looked through it to find this part that Peggy mentioned, because I had not seen that before, or I don't remember having seen it before, because it wasn't important at the time. It's only in retrospect now. This is August of 2021. So this is a little over 3 years now. And he's talking about the musket speech, and then he's talking about the new church commissioner, whom he will introduce.
3 years later, 2017, Elder Dallin H. Oaks, not then, but soon to be in the first presidency. He would be sitting where only one chair, one heartbeat away from the same position President Nelson now has. He quoted our colleague, Elder Neil A. Maxwell, who had said, and I quote, "In a way, Latter-day Saint scholars at BYU and elsewhere are a little bit like the builders of the temple in Nauvoo, who worked with a trowel in one hand and a musket in the other. Today, scholars building the temple of learning must also pause on occasion to defend the kingdom. I personally think, Elder Maxwell went on to say, this is one of the reasons the Lord established and maintains this university. The dual role of builder and defender is unique and ongoing. I'm grateful we have scholars today who can handle, as it were, both trowel and musket. Then Elder Oaks said challengingly, I'd like to hear a little more musket fire from the Temple of Learning. He said this in a way that could have applied to a host of topics in various departments, but the one he specifically mentioned was the doctrine of the family and defending marriage as the union of a man and a woman. Little did he know that while many would hear his appeal, especially the School of Family Life, who moved quickly and visibly to assist, some others fired their muskets all right, but unfortunately didn't always aim at those hostile to the church. We thought a couple of stray rounds even went north of the point of the mountain.
So there's one of the main segments of the speech about the musket fire. It's interesting as I go back and I look at it very closely for tonight's show. I am reminded that this really wasn't something that Elder Holland said. He was quoting Elder Oaks and adopting it as his own by quoting it. And I think the really difficult part of it, the most problematic part of it, was the quote from Elder Oaks, using the metaphor that had already been established from Elder Maxwell.
Can I just quickly say, my mom and dad taught me never to point a gun at anyone. And so maybe from a religious institution, muskets should not be pointed anywhere.
And now you have 3 upper church leadership. You have Maxwell, you have Oaks, and Holland that are all perfectly comfortable talking about firearms pointed at someone whose ideology they don't like. That's disturbing.
So here's the thing, okay? That's the famous part. Here's the part that I don't even think I saw until today. And this is where he introduces the new commissioner of education. And his name's, what is it? It's a name that's like Clark
Gilbert.
Clark Gilbert. It's like, it could be either way.
Not Clark Griswold.
It could be Clark Gilbert. It could be Gilbert Clark. It's like, what's eating Gilbert Clark? Well, we'll see if we can find out in tonight's show.
Our bright, budding new Commissioner of Education, Elder Clark Gilbert, is one of my traveling companions today. You may be certain that Clark loves this institution, his alma mater, deeply, and brings to his assignment a reverence for its mission and its message. As part of Dr. Gilbert's introduction to you, I'm asking Elder Gilbert to come on campus on any calendar he and President Worthen can work out. And whether those visits are formal or casual, or both, I hope they can accomplish at least 2 things. First of all, I hope you'll come to see quickly the remarkable strengths Elder Gilbert brings to his calling, even as he learns more about the flagship of his fleet and why our effort at a church educational system would be a failure without the help, success, and participation of BYU.
There's the introduction. So he's the new commissioner of education. He's put in his post, and things have been happening ever since then. And that's what this story is about. What's been happening since he's been put in his post, Clark Gilbert, and what's going on now. Here's a picture, another picture of Elder Clark Gilbert. By the way, he was on the one on the left in the scene when Holland was introducing him. So there he is, getting some kind of award, Medal of Freedom from President Nelson or something like that. And now back to the story. BYU music professor Jason Bergman, who teaches trumpet at BYU, but does no longer because of the atmosphere, who had been teaching trumpet at a prestigious Texas university in 2018. When BYU recruited him, he bristled at the increasing clampdown on LGBTQ plus activism he saw on the Provo campus, which eventually would include shutting down Y Mountain to rainbow colors, and at the denial of racism and misogyny that still existed. He says, I had LGBTQ students and saw how they suffered. I started to pay attention to how people of color and women were treated. It was and continues to be hard for them. So what we're going to find out is that Peggy reached out to dozens, she says, of people, professors at BYU, and none of them would speak to her on the record. This person is no longer a professor at BYU. That's why he's speaking on the record, apparently. All right. By the way, handing it to you, Rebecca, because you know this gentleman, don't you?
I do. He's my new best friend. Mormonish taped a podcast yesterday with Professor Bergman. This will air on Tuesday night, tomorrow night at 6 p.m. He is an exceptional individual. I mean, you're just getting a window into him in this article, but when he tells his story, he's a bishop. He leaves one dream job to go to BYU. And then very quickly, if you want to see the perspective of a just very kind, empathetic individual who this happens to, as he just, descent into madness, right? With what is happening with the professors, and finally makes that just gut-wrenching decision to leave his career there. So yeah, he was just amazing, and just came across him yesterday, and he so graciously said he'd talk to us. So I hope you guys all tune in. Little ad there, but he's incredible.
Thank you very much. You do such great work. Now, also, there's a little bit of a loyalty oath that now is being imposed again upon people who teach at BYU. Then in 2022 came a new employment contract, a sort of loyalty oath in which faculty members, incoming and current, were expected to attest to their support of the church's position on marriage, family, and gender. You can see what this is aimed at, can't you? To many, like Bergman, who felt pressured to agree, it went beyond the church's own stance and seemed to carry an implicit threat. You can't advance if you don't sign off. And maybe you can't get hired if you don't sign off. A convert and former bishop in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Bergman, that's a trumpet professor, began to wrestle with his faith, but feared discussing it with his local ecclesiastical leaders or fellow congregants. Now remember, these people who teach at BYU, they're members of the church, and according to where they live, they go to whatever ward it is and whatever stake it is where they live, right? But their bishop has to clear them for a temple recommend. And their stake president has to clear them for a temple recommend. And if this person doesn't get cleared for a temple recommend, you're going to be out of your job as a professor at BYU, because that is one of the requirements of having the job at BYU, is that you have an active temple recommend. And generally, you'll be given 90 days notice that you're going to have to quit unless you can rectify this with your bishop and stake president. And if you can, then you can stay. And if you can't, then you're gone. So that's how much power is given to bishops and stake presidents over the lives and careers of professors at a university. Okay. Do you want to say anything about that, either of you?
I want to jump in for just a moment. I know of two people who are employees of BYU. I won't say what department, won't say what they do, but they both have made me aware that when these oaths were put into place, and the people who had existing employment, not new employees, but people who had tenure, they're not forced to sign it, but they are heavily pressured over and over again. So it's put in front of you and you're asked to sign it. And if you go, no, I don't want to, it's not mandatory, they come back 6 months later and they ask you again, and they stay on you. They're not just going to walk away and leave you alone. They're going to make you feel shame and guilt for not doing it. So, and all new employees have to sign it, or else you're not hired. And if you I think it's a year or less or something like that, you have to sign it. It's a crazy moment with what they're doing.
Yeah, and if I could just speak very quickly to the link between the bishop and the university and how close and how quick it is. I've told this story before, but it's very relevant. When I was newly married, poor, worked at BYU, I confessed to my bishop that I was not a full tithe payer because I work at BYU and don't make enough money to pay tithing. Anyway, he instantly said, I know you work at BYU. I'm going to have to call them. We're going to have to talk about your ecclesiastical endorsement. So right there, I could lose my job after confessing I'm having, struggles with money. That's how fast it happens. I quickly got a for cash advance off a credit card and paid that extra tithing. I'm still paying off the card, I think. I always make that joke. But, I took care of it because I saw instantly that would have impacted my job within a day.
Yes.
That's how serious it is what I'm trying to say.
I want to say this too, because I think this is important. The way the church is set up, as it's just been described with the temple recommended, you got to have it, and how much power the bishop and stake president, either or, have over you, means that if somebody in leadership wanted to get rid of you as a professor at BYU without firing you and giving cause, then all he has to do, if he's important enough, is to contact your bishop and tell them to do an interview on you and take away your temple recommend. Because once they do that, then the person's going to get fired anyway. And the leader, his hands appear to be clean, right? Because I think that what's going on here is that the bishops and the stake presidents are not doing their job up to snuff as far as the leaders of the church are concerned. And so now they have installed Clark Gilbert as the school commissioner, the education commissioner, who now has this power too, okay, to hire and fire. So somebody else who can take the heat, who apparently, even though in the diagram would be obviously beneath the apostles, it appears that he does things that apostles don't want to be seen doing. So he can take the heat for them. Okay. Going on with the article. What if he said something, once again, this is back to Bergman, the trumpet player. What if he said something in a Sunday school class that was seen as challenging on, say, polygamy, and it got back to his BYU superiors? He decided, I can never speak up at church again. It's the only thing you can do is say nothing, because now you can be reported for saying something that you didn't know you shouldn't have said, but now it's going to be used against you by people who are not even going to talk to you before they have you hit the road. So, like many others, Bergman remains silent. He later found a position at Indiana University's Jacobs School of Music, and that's where you interviewed him, right, Rebecca?
Yes, they were having a huge snowstorm, but that's where he is. And he has made friends with our friend, Spencer Anderson. So they're hanging out there together, the best and the brightest, the cream of the crop. It's not at BYU. Moved on.
Whenever God closes a door, he opens a window.
In Indiana.
BYU is not safe, Bergman said. He says it's not safe for anyone who doesn't fit the Orthodox mold. That seems to be a sentiment shared by a sizable number of faculty members who feel demeaned, disrespected, powerless, and afraid. To many of them, the environment represents a throwback to the era of Ernest Wilkinson. That's why I said the purge begins again. BYU president was Ernest Wilkinson from 1951 to 1970, who worked with conservative apostles and future church presidents Joseph Fielding Smith and Harold B. Lee to remold church education. Here's one of the things that he was quoted as saying back in 65. Nor do we intend to admit to our campus, in other words, allow on our campus, any homosexuals. If any of you have this tendency and have not completely abandoned it, may I suggest that you leave the university immediately after this assembly. We do not want others on this campus to be contaminated by your presence. So this is the background. And strangely, there seems to be a lot of similarities between the purge going on then and the purge going on now and the reasons for it. The more things change, the more things stay the same. They targeted, this is Latter-day Saint historian Matthew Bowman writing in his new book, Joseph Fielding Smith, a Mormon Theologian. They targeted instructors back in the 60s and 70s. They targeted instructors they believed unorthodox, tightened the curriculum, and transformed the process of hiring to favor teachers who shared their own ideas about orthodoxy. They agree with the leadership about orthodoxy. That's what he writes based on his research. And it sounds exactly like what's going on now. Today, the threat of retribution apparently is so real that after dozens of interviews, by which I understand to be more than 24, after dozens of interviews with present and former BYU faculty and administrators across many disciplines, not one current professor, even those with tenure, would go on the record for this story. I thought this was brilliant on Peggy's part. She can't get anybody who's a professor at BYU to go on the record So she makes the fact that they won't go on the record the story. Brilliant. Yeah, what do you say about that? It sounds like maybe people are scared to speak up. One veteran teacher said, low morale is pretty universal. The default position is not to trust anybody. You can't trust anyone because they may turn you in. Clark Gilbert, who declined to be interviewed or comment for this story. Do you recognize that, Bill? By the way, Clark Gilbert, he declined to be interviewed for this story. Clark. I have a word to say about this, Clark, and I'll say it in a few minutes. He declined to be interviewed or comment for this story. Wouldn't even give a comment. What a weasel. Espoused the freedom to choose and encourage what he called in a recent speech at BYU, Idaho, moral agency. Okay, so I've got to talk to you about this because I don't think Peggy understands this yet. You understand this, Bill. You did the show on this a couple years ago, the death of free agency in Mormonism, with our good friend, Elder David A. Bednar, and his relabeling of agency to moral agency and his redefinition of the entire thing to no agency at all. You know that. I know that. Rebecca knows that. Pretty much everybody in this audience knows that. I don't think Peggy got the memo, because what she's apparently doing is seeing this as strange, that it doesn't make sense. Because here's Clark, I don't say Goebbels.
A Freudian slip.
Excuse me, Clark Gilbert. Clark Gilbert, who declined to be interviewed or comment for the story, he espoused the freedom to choose and encouraged what he called in a recent speech at BYU, Idaho, moral agency. So if he is espousing the freedom to choose, then why would he be acting the way he is allegedly acting? It seems to be. Well, the reason why is because moral agency isn't what it used to be. But under his leadership, interviewees say the church education system seems to favor obedience to rigid doctrinal interpretations over personal choice. Okay? So she's seeing this as a contradiction. And this is what I wanted to tell Peggy. I love your story. I appreciate you so much. But memo to Salt Lake Tribune. Moral agency is obedience to rigid doctrinal interpretations over personal choice. That's what moral agency means now. And Clark Goebbels was just following the lead of David Bednar.
Can I just say really quickly, RFM, because just to make it clear to Peggy, David Bednar changed the definition. Free agency was done away. Peggy, you can go on YouTube, do a quick search, look up David Bednar free agency, and you'll see the clip. But he's gone all over the country, said it on a half dozen occasions, in the loyalist in the church, the Orthodox believers in positions of authority are seeing themselves as carrying forward the church by backing Bednar and teaching this and permeating it throughout the church. Can't, RFM.
Here you are. You came to a period before I expected you to, Old Bean.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's like the ministry of truth is what this is becoming in the LDS Church. And I wish I were exaggerating. The ministry of truth in 1984, right? Where they have ministries and everything is the opposite, right? Peace means war. Truth means falsehood. Agency.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Moral agency means you have to do what we tell you to do.
Right? I was going to say, it's like the new kids cartoons, doing things that are hard because God wants you to. That's the very simplistic way of saying this. You have to do things that are hard.
That is a good point. Moral agency. Now, Clark Gilbert, who previously laid off 43% of the staff at the church-owned Deseret News. I'm sure he's a favorite there. Can you imagine this guy? What a hatchet he swings. He laid off almost half of the staff at the church-owned Deseret News. Has worked to disrupt faculty systems long in place at BYU and make it more overtly orthodox. He is their man. Secular pressures, secular, non-church, secular pressures threaten to limit the valuable contribution of religious universities. He, Clark Gilbert, who supervises BYU campuses in Utah, Idaho, and Hawaii, as well as Salt Lake City's Ensign College, and a global online offering called BYU Pathways Worldwide. That's a big clause right in the middle of that. argued in a 2022 essay for Deseret magazine. So they're quoting him from 2022 essay and then saying he's not only over BYU, Utah, he's over all the BYUs and a couple other things as well, educationally related, because he's the commish. In his first year, I thought this was interesting. In his first year as CES commissioner, Gilbert undertook an informal study of BYU faculty members and grouped them into 4 categories. It's always good to pigeonhole people. Number 1 is called the faithful core. The second one is the supportive sinner. The third is the secular first. And fourth are the open foes. So the faithful core, they teach with the Holy Spirit and weave in church tenets as they understand them. And I thought, as they understand them, I thought that was a strange thing to add. But as they understand them, that's how the article reads. These are the good guys, right? From the church's point of view. The supportive sinner is number 2. They support the church, but are not as enthusiastic as church leaders think they ought to be. Okay, so I guess they're lukewarm in their testimony. The secular first, this is the third group, the secular first. They put, so professors in this category, they put truth in quotation marks, right? They put truth from any source on an equal footing with the Latter-day Saint gospel. Now, it's funny because Joseph Smith did that too. He said that we need to accept truth from whatever source it comes, right? And if you don't, then you will not come out a true Mormon. That's how he defined a true Mormon, which is why, by the way, why I am a true Mormon. Okay, more than a lot of Mormons I know. I am a true Mormon because I follow Joseph Smith's advice there. But that's the third group. And the fourth group, the open foes, they write an article or take a public position contrary to that of the church. It's like 3 degrees of glory and then outer darkness, huh? When presenting this to a Salt Lake dinner group, yeah, I bet he thought this was going to be private. When presenting this to a Salt Lake City dinner group of prominent Latter-day Saints, Gilbert said that the faith's governing first presidency will not stand for a contrary opinion by professors at BYU, according to several attendees, to whom Peggy obviously spoke and who obviously didn't want to have their names on the record, and that he would find a way to get them out. So he's there to clean house, this guy. Gilbert did not respond to a specific Salt Lake Tribune question about how he would remove them. One senior professor said, "I honestly don't know any open foes among the faculty or a single bad apple." Okay. I think the importance of this quote, which was witnessed by several people, although not recorded apparently, is that Clark Gilbert says he is going to clean him out, he's going to get him out, and he is acting under the direction of the first presidency. As if we couldn't figure that one out. It's nice for him to admit it, though. Now the clearance office, the dead letter file. The ecclesiastical clearance office, which Clark Gilbert leads, has say over hiring and firing. It is intended to assist in the process. Now we're going to go to the BYU spokesperson because Clark Gilbert, he's not going to talk to anybody. It is intended to assist in the process, said Jenkins, the BYU spokesperson, of ensuring that employees in the church educational system commit to maintain gospel standards as part of their employment, including an annual ecclesiastical endorsement from their local bishop. Right. The university has been clear about its commitment to these expectations, which are consistent across all church schools, Jenkins said, and communicated to all prospective BYU employees. So that's the yes man for the church talk in there. The article goes on. It's not clear, however, to everybody. And this is going to be the first major problem that I have with this entire thing. This guy is Taylor Petrie. He's a Latter-day Saint religion professor at Kalamazoo College in Michigan. So it's okay for him to go on the record. See, the guidelines about what is and isn't church doctrine can be ambiguous, said Taylor Petrie. What Clark Gilbert and some church leaders think is fixed and unquestionable church doctrine is not what others think. And honestly, there's a host of issues right now that different leaders of the church who are currently alive have taken different positions on. So, which one, if I advocate for, am I going to get in hot water for? I don't know, right? So, left in this position of having no idea what it is I can talk about, what it is I can't. On top of the traditional recommend questions, which are required for entrance to any of the faith's sacred temples, the bishops, they say lay leaders, it's bishops and stake presidents. Bishops must affirm that candidates, so now they've got these additional questions, okay, that the bishop has to ask a person for their temple recommend interview if they teach or work at BYU. Do they have a testimony of church doctrine? Whatever the heck that means. Including its teachings on marriage, family, and gender. Yep, that's where the focus is. Do they support current church policies and practices, whatever they may be? Do they have or have they demonstrated an exemplary and extended pattern, at least 1 year, of avoiding pornography? So I'm glad they got the good stuff in there too. They're very, very concerned about many things. The things they're most concerned about are often the least important. But these are additional questions that are being asked of professors and that they have to pass with their bishop and their stake president in order to get their temple recommend. And they have to have the temple recommend in order to be able to work at BYU. The Utah-based faith, Mormonism, opposes same-sex marriage, for example, but does not necessarily penalize members who support it. I mean, we've seen different people in the church who are members of the church, who are homosexual and openly to some degree, and some get treated differently than others. So what is a person to do if you're a professor at BYU? It's hopelessly confusing. You don't know where you can step without a mind going off. And that's the first huge problem that I have with this. So these are examples that I think Peggy came up with about areas where it's gray and how do you know where to stand? Could a BYU professor who writes in support of LGBTQ plus rights or wears a rainbow pin be seen as bucking the church and in danger of workplace discipline, even dismissal? They don't know because it doesn't say it. They could say this. They could put in the contract, you can't wear a pin of any political thing or even just this pin, okay? It's a private university. They can make their own rules. I don't necessarily agree with these rules, but I want to say this. That the main thing that I have a problem with, okay, conceding the fact that they have the right to make the rules that they're making, is their refusal to be express and clear about what the rules are for the professors. I think it goes with students too, but for the professors here, they refuse to be clear about it. And the reason that really, really rankles me is because, number one, they're causing this situation among the professors by not being clear. And the reason they're not being clear is because they don't want other people to see them taking the positions that they actually believe. They are ashamed of the revelations that God has given to them as it impacts LGBTQ plus people, okay, and others. But this is really where I think the focus of this whole story is at for Clark Gilbert's, okay, or Clark Gilbert. So they refuse to be clear about it because they won't let anybody else, they don't want to take the heat. Remember how President Nelson said that prophets are not often popular, but they will tell you the truth? BS. This is all about the prophets trying to be popular. And they're not telling you the truth. What they're doing, I believe, based upon this research, this excellent research that Peggy did, what they're doing is finding different people to do the dirty work for them that they don't want to be seen doing. So they won't take a position except vague kind of positions. It creates this situation of panic on campus where people don't know, what can I do? What can I not do? What can I say? What can I not say? And that's simply because the leaders will not take a position. They don't want to be seen standing for the right, which is really all it comes down to. They don't have faith in God. These days, faculty members are also noting another worry. Previously, spouses were invited. So this is the spouse versus non-spouse at the interview. Previously, spouses were invited to accompany a prospective hire to the general authority interview. In some cases, according to several candidates and faculty members, that now has become required. So when you go in and meet the GA, first off, you go to wherever the admissions place is. It's in a different place in the article. And at some place, if you keep getting passed on, you have a meeting with the GA. And then after the GA, then you have to get cleared by the education commissioner, by that clearance office, right? That Clark Gilbert's in charge of. So it's actually not the apostle who meets or GA who meets with them, who has the final say. They certainly have a final say. They can go thumbs up or thumbs down. But if they go thumbs up, that's not the final say. Then the person goes to that office of clearance, that clearance office, because the clearance office has the final thumbs up or thumbs down. All right. It is absolutely unprecedented at other schools, said Petrie, the Kalamazoo College professor. I have never heard of that. And you see, part of this plays into the fact that there are negative consequences going on for professors if they're married and their spouse steps away from the church. This is the thing. They're hiring both of them. They're hiring one of them, but they're reviewing both of their orthodoxy, because both of them have to pass the orthodoxy test for the one of them to get hired, I think is what the concern is. On top of that, some lay leaders, i.e. bishops, have threatened to withhold candidate or continuing faculty members' ecclesiastical endorsement if their spouses stop going to church. Yep. Creepy and Orwellian. Now, this guy's a lawyer. Frederick Gedix, or Gedix, was a professor of constitutional law and legal theory at BYU's J. Reuben Clark Law School for 34 years. He's retired now. Good for him. During the summer, though, this past summer, one of his junior colleagues asked him to return as a part-time adjunct to team teach a seminar on natural law and natural rights. Gedix agreed and thought all it would entail would be a call to his bishop for clearance. To his dismay, Gedix discovered he was required to open an account with a background investigating firm. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Yes. Just to be an adjunct professor, he has to open an account with a background investigating firm which advertised its expertise as scraping off the internet every bit of information about a person. What, the SCMC can't do the job anymore? They don't trust the SCMC to find out all the dirt on people. That's what I take from that. He asked the senior administrator about it and was told the company was checking only for criminal convictions in the past 7 years and whether he had earned the degrees he claimed, which was total BS. The official denied any knowledge of what the ecclesiastical clearance office might be looking for, Gedix said, and closed by saying more or less that if I didn't like the process, I shouldn't apply. So he said, okay, screw you, I won't. Without specific details, Gedix assumed the firm would prepare an in-depth report on him and his life's work. There's actually no disclosure of what the ECO is interested in, he said. So I can't say for sure what it's looking for. The legal expert began to wonder if there were items on his curriculum vitae that could be seen as liabilities. My work with the ACLU and Obergefell, the landmark Supreme Court decision legalizing same-sex marriage back in 2015. He also said, I have gay relatives, so we have hung a pride flag. These were aspects of his career that he's proud of, Gedix said. It just irritated me that the process was making me worry about them or the things he'd done, I think. It also bothered him that strangers were going to look at a report and make a decision about my spirituality without having met me. The process, he said, is creepy and Orwellian. They are operating on standards of spirituality that are not disclosed. See, not disclosed. And Big Brother's definitely watching you on BYU. Geddix believed he would have been cleared, but didn't want to be part of the process. So he called his colleague to say he would pass on teaching this summer. It betrays a deep lack of trust in the faculty who are already there, in people who apply, he said, and in bishops and regional stake presidents. Because once again, you're not trusting your bishops. You're not trusting your stake presidents to give you the actual scoop on whether this person is sufficiently spiritual and orthodox and observant to be a professor at BYU. No, now you're going to use some kind of private background checking firm. Okay. The LGBTQ conundrum. Of all the issues that seem to raise the most red flags for faculty, any support of LGBTQ plus rights seems to be the most common. Like I said, this is the focus, obviously. After the new contract required employees to support the church's stance on marriage, family, and gender, a number of adjunct professors were dropped without explanation, including some with decades at BYU campuses. Like all universities, BYU does not have to cite why adjunct contracts were unrenewed. But many, including Sue Bergen, assume it was for their LGBTQ plus advocacy. And here's a picture of Bergen. She was let go in 2022 after teaching writing at the Provo School, BYU, for 28 years. She suspects it was for wearing rainbow pins, telling her students that she believes in love for everyone, and for stating she has 2 gay brothers. But she doesn't know, and no one will ever know. Why? Because they didn't tell her, because they don't have to, because they don't want to, because they're ashamed of what they're doing and the position they're taking. That's why they're having other people do their dirty work. Because Bergen had worked for BYU's public communications office when now Apostle Jeffrey Holland was the university president, that's how far back she goes, she contacted him after she was let go to ask if someone at church headquarters had a problem with me, since she didn't know anyone at BYU who did. She said the Apostle Holland writes back to her to say it was not a board of trustees matter per se. Okay, so he wasn't involved, is what he's saying. So he was going to step out of this circle and urged her to contact Gilbert. She said he passed her along to another administrator who offered no explanation. She's out of there. She got the runaround. She got the runaround. Nobody wants to say why they're doing it, even though we all know, don't we? And here's the question I got. Have the apostles on the BYU Board of Trustees abdicated their authority to Clark Gilbert to make the BYU hiring and firing decisions that they support, the apostles themselves support, but that they don't want to be seen making themselves? That's the question I have on this article. Getting close to the end, all these changes, observers say, may have contributed to BYU's decline in rankings by U.S. News and World Report from 61 in 2017 to 109 today. They are already affecting BYU's reputation, Petrie said, in the broader academic world. The new strategy is a classic purity campaign to root out undesirable people and ideas. And can I see behind Mike W.'s comment? And to create homogeneity, he said. But purity campaigns are always dangerous. They create division, stifle thought, and prioritize fear over faith. Okay. Any comments at all about this article? Because then I'm going to go to one that appeared in the Deseret News a couple weeks ago.
I was going to say that I think the whole key here is the use of the middleman. And I think we see this over and over and nowhere more egregiously than here. Gilbert is their middleman, right? Just like the bishops and the stake presidents are the middleman. BYU administrators, apostles, they can all say, it was not us. It is not us at all. Think about when the honor code, which used to include the words, no same-sex romantic affection, right? That was in there. You can't do that. Then suddenly a new version of the honor code, and those words are gone. Talk about confusion, as you mentioned, RFM. The students are like, wait, can we be normal? Can I hold hands, with my girlfriend? Can I kiss my boyfriend on the cheek in a same-sex relationship? They started doing this, right? Then it came down to be clarified. Oh, no, we still adhere to the church's standards. They never put it back in the honor code for a little while. But were you to go to your bishop, the middleman, and were you to try to get a recommend or an ecclesiastical endorsement, you wouldn't be able to get one. Therefore, you would not be able to go to BYU. So the middleman, very effective, does its work. I think about Laura Lee Hall. We've all seen multiple interviews with her. She was not fired from her position as the chief temple architect. Her stake president took away her recommend, and then she was no longer able to work for the church without that recommend or endorsement. So again, this strategy of the middleman leaves them with their hands clean, the upper leadership of the church, and they never have to state what they've done or what they would like to be done. So I think that Gilbert, what's his last name again?
Clark Gilbert. It's like Clark Goebbels or Clark Gable.
Whenever you say it, I always think it's something like the commissioner of the improper use of magic or something, right? He just reminds me of Dolores Umbridge. But it is, it's the classic middleman, and it's a technique that works very well. We did not do this. It's the lower leaders, and we're sorry. That exactly what Holland wrote back in the letter to the professor. So it's very effective, but extremely disturbing and confusing to people that work there. And in talking to Professor Bergman, that's what he said. People are terrified there because they have no idea what they're doing. Is it wrong or right? I went to my niece's same-sex wedding. Will I be fired? Did someone see me there? No one has told me I can't do that, but I have a feeling I maybe shouldn't have done that. These kind of thoughts are going on in all of the professors' heads right now. They have no idea.
No, I think that what's going on is the church has a problem on its hands, obviously. And the problem is they got a big bunch of conservative members, and they got a big bunch of people who are starting to have more progressive leanings, especially when it comes to gay rights, LGBTQ plus issues, right? And so they can't appeal to one without offending the other. That's where they are right now. And those two groups, I think, are approaching similar size. Neither one of them is small. Perhaps the conservative is still bigger. I don't know. But they have a problem. Now, there are different ways that they could approach this problem. But it appears that the way they've chosen is to not address anything with the more conservative, except maybe, take a few essays and sneak them onto the website when they hope nobody's looking. But what they're doing now with the more liberal side of the members is they are continuing to believe what it is they believe, which is you can't wear a gay pride pin on BYU campus. Let's just take that as an example. That's how easy it is to say something, to make it clear, right? You can't do that. They could do that. They don't do that. Why don't they do that? Because they don't want the world to see what they actually believe. And they don't want the world to see what they actually stand for, because they know it will be unpopular. And that's all that's going on. This is my take on the situation. This is my opinion. All right. I can't come up with a lot of different reasons for why they would be doing something so unproductive and so panic causing. But it's obvious that whatever's going on, there's a reason that the top leadership doesn't want to be open about what it is they believe around these LGBTQ plus issues.
The only thing I wanted to add, RFM, you and I did an episode, Mormonism Live, back in 2022. That's when this all started, by the way. I don't know if you remember or not, but that night, one of the things that we covered was the addition to, so it used to be that you had to be living a gospel standard, but you didn't have to be a temple recommend holder. In 2022, when all of this stuff started, this came out, which was every staff member at BYU, the janitor, the professors, the administrators, had to mark that they were either a member of the church or not, because there are some non-Mormon teachers. They still have to agree to things. If you are a member, you have to put in your membership number, and then you have to make this agreement that that your temple recommend is part of it. And so there's that, and then I'll show the other one. See if I can make this a little bigger. And then
By the way, Bill, while you're making that bigger, incredible you remember this. I remember generally the episode about the evolutionists, around the turn of the century before the last one.
Yeah.
But I did not remember this at all.
Yeah, and you pointed to Wilkinson as if here we are again. Well, here we are again, right? Just a note there, full-time faculty, it's what we talked about earlier. Full-time faculty who have opted in and accepted the invitation to adopt the new employment standard. This, by the way, was messaging given to one of my sources. So this was everyone in BYU received this, which laid out sort of how everything worked. Those who opted in, the invitation to adopt the new employment standard will continue to receive an annual contract with the new verbiage related to the new employment standard. Full-time faculty who started work at BYU prior to January 27, 2022 and have not opted in will continue to receive an annual contract containing verbiage consistent with the prior standard, which remains in effect for them, and then all new people have to. But the note here is that, again, it's not that you just say, sorry, Buster, I don't agree, leave me alone. They don't leave you alone. They keep asking you. So there's pressure. They know who the people are who say, I don't want to do that. And obviously those aren't the ones who fit in that top celestial kingdom category of the four ways in which they split out everybody. They know who the people are, and they've got close eyes on them. You cannot make one faulty move. They are just waiting for you to trip up so they can send you packing.
Very good. That your heels may kick at heaven. Yeah. Let me put this back up here on the stage and go to the next thing. Because the church-owned Deseret News put out a preemptive article last month. Because news of this article and that it was in the works has been everywhere, okay? Lots of people know about it. Even Steve Pinecker found out about this. And he talked about it a couple of weeks ago. And anyway, so it's been out there, right? And once again, of course, an article that takes this much time and effort and work is going to take a long time to put together. And a lot of people are going to be contacted, and they may say, hey, guess who I got called by? And then word gets around, right? So the church-owned Deseret News put out a preemptive article last month in order to preempt this article. And now, after having read this article, and once again, this isn't the whole article that we talked about. Go read the whole article. There's a lot of other examples of other professors or former professors that are in there. Here's the article in the Deseret News from December 29th. We got to get this one out as fast as we can. Faith-based, so it's basically a week ago. Headline, faith-based institutions often provide more academic freedom, not less. Scholars on Heterodox Academy panel say. This is written by Jacob Hess, who's obviously a hack, because this is a piece of propaganda, garbage, Jason, or is it Jacob? Jacob, and you know it. You know it is.
Do you remember him? This is the person who wrote with Stephen Smoot, the Nazis had disdain for the Mormons. That was this guy.
Got it.
Another preemptive article. When they know something unpleasant is going to come out, they make sure that they inoculate ahead of time.
It's just an apologist. That's all it is, an apologist under the guise of a journalist.
You are a tool. You think you will rise up the ranks and be petted and feted. But let me tell you something. You will be tossed away as soon as you are of no more use to them. Just saying, Jacob. Here's what he writes. There is a perception among some observers of higher education that faith-based institutions are restricting and constraining academic freedom in unfortunate ways. Well, no shit, Sherlock. Did you just hear about this article that Peggy Fletcher Stack put out? Of course it is. And nowhere is it more so than at Brigham Young University, Jacob. You know it's true. You're putting out a smokescreen and you're gaslighting people. Okay? That's all you're doing. And then he has this headline in the middle, quoting someone, more intellectual freedom than anywhere else. Are you kidding me? Really? So you're saying that there's more intellectual freedom at BYU than anywhere else. You are a nutter. You're a mental case. And this reminds me of something else that was said about a year ago. Oh, no, this is a comment. I want to go around here. This is the one I was looking for. Where Sister Annette Dennis said, there is no other religious organization in the world that I know of that has so broadly given power and authority to women. I mean, do you guys think we're absolute idiots out here? that we don't know what's going on? So this is the second thing that I really, really don't like, okay? I'll get to that here in a second. The first thing is not taking a stand, being so embarrassed of your position on religious issues that you refuse to tell the public about them and be clear about them to your employees so they know what's expected and what's not, so they can make a decision, an informed decision whether they want to sign up for this or not. Okay? I could understand if they didn't. There's a lot who will. Okay? Just make it clear. Here was a comment that was made about that article from a guy named Chris D. Robinson, I'll guess. He says BYU has literally had multiple purges in its history to eliminate free thinking and have people stick with defending whatever the Q15 is teaching at the time. So this article must not be referring to LDS schools. That was perfect. Chef's kiss on that one. And I just put this other screen grab there with Boyd K. Packer, who had said, in the church, there is a distinct line of authority. We serve, we are called by those who preside over us. Now, here's my comment. This is the second big thing that hacks me off about this.
Wait, RFM, go back to that real quick.
Yeah, sure.
I hope people pick up on what he's saying. In the church, there is a distinct line of authority. We serve where called by those who preside over us. Yes, you serve where you're called, for sure. But Boyd K. Packer, if I'm not mistaken, is the other person who said, like, I had to decide, was I going to represent the brethren to the people or the people to the brethren? The people you're actually serving are the higher ups.
Yes. Which way do you face?
Yeah. You're not, I know you in our minds as a Mormon, you go, no, I'm a bishop. I serve the ward. No. You serve the stake president in taking care of what needs to be done in the ward. You serve those above you, not below you.
Yes. Very good. Thank you for pointing that out. By the way, he was addressing the Relief Society when he said that, apparently back in 1998. Big surprise. Now, here's my second big problem with this. Eventually, I'll get to this. And I'm talking to the church leaders. If you're going to crack down on teachers following the prophet at a church-owned university, that's your responsibility. It's also your right. It's your privilege, okay? But don't turn around and lie to us that your church-owned university has more intellectual freedom than anywhere else, okay? Any comments about that, you two, before I go on? Because that was the last quote, and that's the end.
I was going to say that I feel like perhaps someone that says, I know of no greater power or no greater intellectual freedom, maybe they don't get out much. I mean, honestly.
Well, there's no place that has more agency than the church, where you're told everything that you have to do.
I like the line of thinking where they was it the commenter that you read where they said, you know, whatever the doctrine of the day is what you have to support at BYU. And I was thinking, okay, so probably 40 years or so ago, you would have to swear that Joseph Smith never practiced polygamy. You would probably have to never talk about that at BYU. Today, you better damn well be on board that he did. He did practice it, right? There's so many examples like that where it makes your head spin. It just changes and changes.
Just to, again, I know I'm jumping in here a bunch. Just a note, he worked for the Deseret, Clark Gilbert, worked for the Deseret News first, fired a bunch of people. You can bet your ass, excuse my language, you can bet your ass that he was hired to clean house at the Deseret News. He did such a good job, they put him in at BYU because he's the guy. He's the guy who says, I can be a cold-hearted killer. I can sit down with the old 60-year-old lady at BYU and I can say, this is your last day. Pack your stuff, put it in a box, and hit the door. This is the guy. This is why he's hired. He is cold-hearted. He will do what the brethren says. He was brought to BYU for this reason.
And he's on a track to become a general authority.
And he will. Probably
an apostle, perhaps someday, prophet himself.
May I respectfully disagree with you? People like this who are good at doing the wet work that you don't want to do with your own hands are best left outside the building.
Do you think he knows that, though? I feel like,
I have no idea what he knows.
Going up the chain, right? Doing what he's told to do.
All he knows is that he is the witch finder, the witch prosecutor, the witch judger, and the witch burner. Well, Rebecca, I think that Bill, who's in charge of the show? It's Bill, right?
It is. So
Bill, I'm handing it back to you so you can hand it to Rebecca.
Let's do it. Rebecca Biblioteca, take us away.
Take it away. Yeah, I liked your characterization of somebody my age being fired at BYU because I can see that. Wait, what? Okay. Sorry.
Relax, lady.
It can happen. Pack that box. You should always have a brown box with you wherever you work. Anything can happen at any minute. That's what I say. So, all right. This was an interesting article with more data from Jana Reese, who we love. She tells it how it is. And it was called Who is Most Likely to Leave the LDS Church and Why? There have been a lot of stats on everybody's leaving. And now people are curious about, well, who exactly is leaving? What demographic is stepping out more? And I saw this article posted on one of the post-Mormon sites and somebody wrote, yeah, really fed up women are leaving. That's who's leaving. It was great. It was a wonderful thread. And I thought I agree with every reason there. But yeah, this was a great article. Again, as I said, Jana Reese wrote that amazing book, The Next Mormons, How Millennials Are Changing the LDS Church. And she continues to gather data. She'll put these articles out every couple months or so with more data, few graphs. It's really interesting. And of course, it's all going to end up in a book that everybody's going to get. This is going to be really revelatory. And so she says here, I won't read all of it, but she says, it's important. It's also about the kinds of societies and institutions we create and who feels comfortable in them. So that's interesting. It's not just who's leaving, but who's left, right? And why are you left? That's extremely important to look into. And this is what some of this shows. So talk about putting people into categories, just like we had Gilbert doing. Jana and her team have also done that. For this survey, they have the leavers, right? And there was 178 leavers in her study. Those are those who have been in the church members and they've since left. She says pretty straightforward. A fraction of this group, only a fraction, formally remove their names and their records. So that is telling too, that, people just leave and they just go. The next segment of her survey are the liminals, who 878 people represented in the survey. They're the largest chunk of respondents, and they bucked the in or out binary by either participating regularly despite doubts or the exact opposite, holding on to their beliefs in the faith's teachings, yet being inactive. I've run into people like this. You think they haven't gone forever, and yet you say something and they're like, take that back. That's not true. The earth is only 6,000 years old. It's a funny mindset. So that's that middle group. Let's see. And according to the authors, Jana Reese, this understudied group constitutes the majority of current Latter-day Saints, meaning they're have doubts, but they're still attending, or they've left, but they still have a great affection and belief in the teachings of the church. So a little bit of conflict there in both of those groups. And the last one are the loyalists. These are full tithe payers who self-describe themselves as very active, and the research includes 542 of those. So this is the group that they kind of crunched, asked them certain questions about their beliefs, staying and going, and came up with this sort of description of who's leaving and who is staying. So she said sexual orientation jumps out as one of the most important factors on whether a person disaffiliates. 80% of the leavers reported being heterosexual, compared to 98% of the loyalists. Those are the tithe payers, always there. And the liminals at 86%, which most closely match the total U.S. population. So she's saying that those that leave, perhaps have, more of a fluidity in how they're living their lives there. She also found that there's a positive correlation, if you can look at this very interesting looking graph, find a positive correlation between church involvement and academic achievement. Now, this is interesting. More than half of the loyalists had a 4-year college degree or more, versus only 23% of the liminals and 28% of the leavers. Now, that's huge. That's telling you that the people that have the higher education, at least the college degree, they are the ones that are comfortable still in the church. If we go back to that first paragraph where she said, who's comfortable here? It's
Rebecca?
the people who have the education. Yes.
What is it you find so interesting about this graph? I'm not seeing it.
The colors. The colors are so pretty. That's
It's
all
the
I meant.
colors? Okay.
Oh, stop. All right. Okay. Don't distract me. All right. Another thing is she said, finally, this was interesting. The loyalists, the ones that are always in the seats, 68% were more likely to be married to their first spouse compared to 38% of the liminals and 33% of the leavers. Whatever that means, you can take that for what it is worth. So other people who have looked at the data, other people that crunch these kinds of numbers, specifically Ryan Cragen, who wrote a book called Goodbye Religion, The Causes and Consequences of Secularization, he kind of looked at these findings and recognized that her data follows the kinds of things that he and his colleagues are finding, in that sexual minorities are nearly twice as likely to leave. I think we can all guess why. Again, it has to do with comfort and acceptance level at church, at the religion, I believe. Half of the loyalists have a 4-year college degree, indicating, and I think this is the most telling thing, it is effectively, the church is effectively a white collar religion. And I've heard a lot of other people talk about this. The people that fit into that white collar stereotype are the ones that are most comfortable at church. They're the ones that the church works for. And so he goes on to say, what leaders are expected to do for their church assignments align very closely what is taught in college and what would be expected in a white collar or professional job. So in other words, it's sort of a seamless transition for certain people in a certain demographic to be in a corporate structure that calls itself a religion. Now, not everybody fits into that glass slipper, right? And so they're not comfortable. But for those that are in that demographic, it works. It works very well, and they're not going to leave. Probably, even if they have doubts, look into a few of the truth claims. It works so well for them that there's going to be no reason to leave. Your brain works very hard to keep you comfortable. And until something happens so painful and so shocking to rock you out of your paradigm, you're going to find a way to fit beliefs or questions, just sort of a way to kind of smooth them away, because what you're doing in the church works so well in this corporate-like structure. So anyway, I thought that was really interesting. Not too long of an article, but to me, who's comfortable in the church is just as telling as who's leaving. Any quick thoughts on that?
I was just going to say that long ago, even before I went on my mission, I had no business experience. I mean, I just graduated high school, for crying out loud. But I started becoming aware that all the meetings in church were business meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And they're conducted as business meetings are conducted. Even the worship service is a business meeting.
Yeah.
That was appealing to me, by the way, as a convert at 17 from a blue collar family. There was something really appealing about this sort of corporate structure, that you could work your way up, that you could take on certain responsibilities. You'd be given chances to sort of develop things, public speaking. You start off as an executive secretary and you keep great notes, but before long, you're the counselor in the elders quorum presidency. Now you're the young men's president. Now you're the counselor in the bishopric. And there's sort of a sense of, if you are the right kind of guy, you're the right kind of guy, and you behave yourself the right kind of way, you can move up in this structure. It doesn't come with great pay or benefits. All the good benefits are invisible and only find out on the other side. But there was something about that appealed to 17-year-old me, that I really enjoyed Mormonism the first 10 years.
By the way, let me clarify. I'm not saying that sacrament meeting is a business meeting. Okay. I'm saying it's structured. That's the outline of it, is a business meeting. Which is why you have announcements and all sorts of things, and why, even though everybody has a program, there's still this need to announce everything that's going to happen and who's going to do it. You know?
No, I think there's a reason that if you look at the top structure of the church, where are the artists? Where are the musicians? Where are the creative writers? There's nobody at the top except for who's comfortable there, the white collar, degreed businessmen, lawyers, doctors. You know, where can you imagine if there were a few artists or somebody that was creative in the Q15 or even a general authority? It would be a whole different world. For one thing, they would have saved the inside of the Salt Lake Temple. It's easy for a lawyer to say, "Get that." You know, somebody else might go, "Now hold on." You know, somebody with different sensibilities. I also see people that fit this pattern, this suit so well, say over and over, God's house is a house of order. God is a God of order. This is what they stand behind. And order to them is a corporate structure, from the, bishop to the counselors to somebody you report to somebody. Your reporting structure is there, and it's a house of order. And like Bill said, that is very appealing, comforting, and reassuring to certain people. To other people, it's like death. They can't survive in that kind of an environment.
Religions that survive typically go from a charismatic phrase where there are spiritual gifts abounding, and then over a relatively short period of time, those end up getting sort of cut off, and then everything is about organizing what was given during the period of the gifts, and then managing everything, right? So I believe that passage from the New Testament, God's house being a house of order, which I heard all the time, of course, is probably traditionally the go-to passage from the scripture to justify why it is that it's okay that you've lost all the gifts of the Spirit and you don't have them anymore.
Yeah. In fact, it was Hugh Nibley's Leaders to Managers.
Mm-hmm.
Hugh Nibley, as an insider apologist, was also frustrated with sort of that development in the church. Talking about leaders and managers, let's talk for a moment about who's leading in sexual abuse. It seems like from the religious perspective, there's a lot of fear over gay people and transgender people, that they're the ones who are creating and causing and wreaking havoc in the sexual abuse arena. But somebody did the research, and that's not what they found. So it said, who's making the news for sex crimes involving children? I don't have the lady's name or her picture up here, but she did the research. She's got all the data. So she collected all from every state newspaper reports of sexual abuse, and she then categorized them based on what that person's employment was, what their sexual orientation was, as far as could be determined by the news article. And what she found was quite interesting. So it said, who are the real predators? This site was set up to allow public access and easy verification of the data that goes into my TikTok series, Who's Making News for Sex Crimes Involving Children. This research project aggregates and analyzes news reports published about sexual assaults on children in the United States and is designed to be fully verifiable. You can check the data by downloading the full database. Just click the source data tab. So crimes against children. Now, first, there's an other, and we'll talk in a moment about what other is, and you'll see why it is the biggest category, but you'll see why it really is meaningless. The largest category of people who sexually abuse children are family and known relatives. And we all sort of know that it's right. The people that are closest to the child, that have the closest access to the child, which is the family and close friends of the family. Next up, a teacher. Now, the teachers see your kid 5 days a week, 6 hours a day, 7 hours a day. The next biggest one, and almost equal to teachers, is the person who sees your family for a few hours, 1 day a week, religious employment. After that, it's police, politicians, doctor, and then transgender was like 1, 2, 3 people. And we'll get to the number here in a second. It was on that slide before. Not listed, so there's things that they couldn't gather any information. Folks that were doing things from the internet, and then drag queens was another one. And what this lady was trying to do was to show that our predisposed perception that the abusers is the gay guy, the transgender woman, it's those folks who are committing the abuse, when in reality, it is the teachers, it is those with religious employment. Now, you can be in both categories, and so something can be represented in both places. If a teacher was noted as being transgender, they would show up essentially in both columns. So a more detailed breakdown, again, it's the same thing we just went into, but they're showing a little bit more of the data on the left with the numbers of crimes. Who's making the news? Political affiliation, by the way. 67% of sexual abuse occurred by those who were Republican versus 13-point-something% for Democrats, 16% for libertarians, so on and so forth. I thought that was interesting. Total offenders by category. Again, we'll get to the other. It's the biggest one there, the 35%. It's almost it's a little over the third of the pie. But then again, family, friend, neighbor. But the very next one is somebody who has access to your kid part of 1 day a week. Those with religious affiliation, some sort of religious employment. And then total offenders by category, it lists that as well. So I'll just note here, the top one, they're noting that the other is the biggest category. The graph down below is saying why. What is the other? The other is people who were online abusers reaching out to your children, repeat offenders, school district employees, strangers, military personnel, firefighters, a burglar, a pimp, a drug dealer, a trafficker, an undocumented worker, a Boy Scout leader. So it has a bunch of those, and those all make up the other category. Not important for what we're talking about here. Again, it talks
attorney
about
was way down on that list even further. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, I didn't see attorney on there anywhere, by the way. So
Down there.
you're the
Right next to nurse.
Yeah, you're the safest guy on the block, RFM.
Oh yeah,
Love it. Again, top 10 states, 9 of them are Republican leaning. Offenders per 100,000. I also put Utah on there. Utah was 20th on this list. And again, Republican, 4.65 offenders per 100,000. Religiosity rank, she has Utah ranked at 11th. So I don't know how she got this data. I sort of dispute that. The things that were interesting, 90% of the top 10 highest number of offenders per capita are Republican states. 100% of the top 10 lowest number of offenders per capita were Democrat swing states. So I'll just note that. Here's where I thought it got interesting. So she notes the organizations that made the news most often. And it probably surprises no one. The number one category was the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church's news articles for abuse went on and on and on. It was about twice as long as I included, and I included 3 pages of stuff. So there's the 3 pages from the Catholic Church. The next biggest one was the Mormon Church. And there was this, which had 2 direct articles, but then there was also 2 other places in her general listings where Mormon sex abuse was noted. And then she did an interesting thing here. She said, if we take the number of crimes, 10,884 crimes committed in 62 weeks, and we divide that out by a 7-day week, we end up with 162.1 crimes per week. And then she took those 162.1 sex abuse towards children crimes and categorized them with the size of bubbles of who's committing those. And so the 35 is the other, and it's all this miscellaneous stuff. So if you just throw that out, again, you've got friends and neighbors is the big one. Family members is big. Teachers and teachers' aides is the next bubble. You get coaches, but then right after that, you've got church employees. Notice the other one, the little like orange melon colored one is pastors. And then at the very, very top, the little yellow bubble is Mormon leaders. It has its own bubble because while there is 8, 9 sex abuses per week committed by religious personnel, one of them is LDS.
Wow. Did you see the pink one to the left of it? That's priests and brothers too?
Yeah, so that's all the Catholic Church. That's their bubble. And their bubble is certainly bigger than Mormonism, but Mormonism has its own bubble because it's the second biggest religious institution in terms of the problem.
Wow.
So if I held my mouse over any of these bubbles, it came up and explained who was considered there. So in the people listed in priest, brothers, priest, deacon, Monsignor, Jesuit brothers. See, these are all Catholic titles. The Mormon leaders was Mormon youth minister, so a young men's president, for instance, Mormon bishop, a Mormon lawyer, Mormon leader, child psychologist, repeat offender, Mormon teacher, Mormon leader. But they had some affiliation with having a calling or some sort of employment with the LDS Church. And then down here with people listed in pastors, still Mormon leader, doctor, priest, pastor, chaplain, family member, pastor. So sometimes things could count in more than one bubble. In this pastor bubble, there are 4 abuses per week, but one of them is a Mormon leader. That's what they're trying to communicate. And then the last one here was church employees. So Christian Youth Center, cult leader, Christian professor, parent, Sunday school teacher. I don't know why it says postal worker, but they must have been a Sunday school teacher and a postal worker and committed abuse having to do with connecting to both things. Church drummer, Mormon missionary. So again, that church employment one has 4 abuses per week. One of those is a Mormon, or at least at times there's a Mormon involved in it.
Two. Did you see the Mormon Sunday school teacher?
Yeah, Mormon
right
Sunday
underneath
school.
Mormon missionary.
Yep. So here's what she says. For those who want per capita comparisons, the transgender population of the United States has been estimated at anywhere from 0.5% to 2% of the population, with some estimates as high as 5% of Gen Z. Even though that is likely a substantial undercounting of the transgender population, because many gender non-conforming people live in the woodwork. In other words, they have too much fear to come forward and come out of the closet, per se, and state their truth because it's too risky for them. So it would seem that in that category, it's under reported. But even at that, even if we use the lower estimate, which would put the transgender population at 1,650,000, it's more than 2.5 times the size of the pastor, the ecclesiastical leader population. The ecclesiastical leader population is much smaller than the number of estimated transgender individuals in the U.S., United States of America, inside our society. But what do we find? The data from the 10,885 cases in the database. The cases in the database run from February 10th, 2023 through May 23rd of 2024. How many drag queens committed sexual abuse towards a child? 1. How many transgender folks committed sexual abuse towards a child? 5. How many people with religious employment abuse children? 846. It should be clear at this moment that who we're afraid of and who tells us to be afraid, the people who tell us to be afraid are actually the ones we should be afraid of. It's the churches and the religious folks who are saying, ooh, watch out for those gay people. Watch out for those transgender people. When in reality, it's the religious people who are committing the abuse. And I will, once we move to the next story, I will put the link in the comments so folks can go there.
So I was going back to that 2.5 times thing. So basically, if everything were equal here, right, and you had the same percentage of religious employment people as transgender people molesting kids, then there should be, let's see, 850, 24, 25, basically 2,550 transgender people, because there are so many more of them, 2.5 times more than those who are, what did it say?
Yeah. It basically means that
the pastor population.
Yeah. It basically means that for every 5 transgender abuses statistically in the population, among every 1,000 transgender people, whatever it is, for every 5, there should be 2,000 religious employment abuses. For every 1 drag queen, 2,000 essentially religious employment abuses.
And I think that would be correct, except for the fact that the pastors are not in the entirety of the religious employment. So in other words, it's not exactly apples and apples, but it's still going to be a much bigger number that you would have to have of transgender people if the percentages were the same across the populations.
Yeah. The people you should all be afraid of are the people standing at the pulpit on Sunday and collecting a paycheck from the religious entity. They're the ones you should be scared of. That's what the data says is the child abusers if we pick categories of people. Again, we all know it's family and friends first. Teachers who have your kids 5 days a week are next. But there's a lot more teachers and a lot more access to children. religious employment have very little access to your child, and they are overly represented in those who are committing the abuse. And I think that's an important thing to note. Okay, I don't have anything else with that story. Any thoughts from you guys before we move on?
I have two thoughts on that. One, I'd kind of like to repeat a comment that Landon made in the chat on the other story, and that is the church is absolutely obsessed with background checks for their own, university employees. Where are the background checks for people that are working with your young children all the time as a lay leader? They actively fight against having to do that. So to me, that's a problem. I also wonder about the LDS stats. I wonder if they're higher. They have the hotline, right? The Catholic Church doesn't have the hotline. There are ways to wiggle out from things. There are ways to not have it reported. I think there's a lot of camouflage that the church works really hard to provide for people that are abusing. So I would predict that those numbers are even higher for the LDS pastor lay leaders. So
I agree with you, but I have to say, even with the church working as hard as it can to keep this kind of stuff off the front page or being reported, they still got their own little bubble.
Yeah, they have their own icon, just like the Moroni icon. That's true. And I saw it mentioned in the chat. I was going to bring it up too. There have been increasing ads just on TV, just in print saying, were you abused by the Mormon church? I think lawyers are either figuring out how much money there is there at stake. I mean, we're talking, billions for settlements. And I think they're starting to talk to people. I've been talking to one person who is involved now in a suit for something that happened to him when he was a child. And he said it's interesting because he reached out to several different lawyers, just randomly called those numbers that appear on your screen. Have you been abused? And some of them have no idea what's going on. They think it's the Catholic Church. They know nothing about Mormonism. He said, but increasingly lawyers are figuring this out. And there's a couple out there that he's been in contact with that really do know their stuff. They really do understand Mormonism. They understand what's happening. And I think we're going to see a rise in that kind of an attorney because these cases are everywhere and they're continuing, and there's a lot of money at stake, a lot. I think I've mentioned before with the Catholic Church, it's all spread out into a diocese. So if the San Francisco diocese is sued 500 times and they're bankrupt, no one else can get anything. What's the difference with the LDS Church? Corporation sole. Anyone, anywhere who's been abused can get some kind of settlement up to the tune of, $250 billion. So there's no protection there in saying that my particular little area is bankrupt. Nope. It's all in one place. So think about that.
And just to note to the audience, the link on the screen right there is where all that data is being compiled. whoismakingnews.com. So you can go check that out. Rebecca, you've got the next story for us.
I do have a story, and it is about children. I was going to say, I'll also put the link after the show in show notes and on the Mormon Newscast Facebook page because it was a really interesting article to go through. So, all right. Once again, cartoons, right? I just can't seem to leave these alone. And I will say that of all the things that I post, and I post a lot about things that I just come across and they're interesting or provocative, I've gotten so much pushback and discussion and censoring on these cartoons. Dang cartoon. I haven't got a death threat yet. I got a marriage proposal, but not a death threat. It's very interesting, people's reactions to these cartoons. So we all know we talked about the polygamy cartoons, the plural marriage cartoons for the new D&C curriculum for kids. And I check every day. That's still there. They have not removed it. But there are other cartoon offerings for kids. And this one is just on the church website. And it is about the 3 degrees of glory that you were mentioning before, RFM. We were talking about the different kingdoms. So I will just kind of read these really quickly. And again, I have a couple concerns with these cartoons. This first set is going to illustrate, I feel that some of the concepts taught here are scary and disturbing, very hard to understand for a little kid, and very, very worrisome. So the cartoon series goes through, the celestial kingdom and the terrestrial kingdom, good people, good but misguided people. And then it gets to the people who are going to go to the telestial kingdom. And of course, this is Sydney and Joseph in the D&C having the vision of these different kingdoms, and letting everyone know this is the structure after you die where you're going to go. So it says, so next, Joseph and Sydney saw the telestial kingdom of heaven. People who go to the telestial kingdom were not righteous on earth. So right there, a little kid reading it is going to go, What does that mean? What does doing something bad mean to me? What do I hear at church? What is, little kids are going to hear messages like, don't drink coffee, don't, very simple things that are not really sins are what little kids are going to think of when you read something like this. You're not righteous, you're not good, you're bad. So these people did not believe in Jesus or his gospel. They did not believe the prophets, and they did not obey God's commandments. Well, who's not obeying God's commandments? Could it be my brother who doesn't go to church anymore? That's scary. I'm a little kid. I don't understand. What does that mean? Is my brother not going to be with Jesus?
Could it be my mom who has an anti-Mormon podcast?
Okay, let's not go there. All right. Have you been talking to my kids? No.
It was just an example.
Just a random example. Yeah, it was nothing. Okay, sorry. I'm trying to get back over here. Here we go. Okay. So this next one says, I'm going to have to read that. Actually, you know what, RFM, why don't you read the next two? Because these are really blurry for some reason on mine. Oh, look, there we go. Maybe that'll help. Let's see.
People who are going to the celestial and terrestrial kingdoms will be resurrected when Jesus comes to earth again. People who are going to the celestial kingdom will not be resurrected until 1,000 years after Jesus comes again.
Yeah. So again, kids are going to start looking at their own families and think, some of us will be together, some aren't. Why? They're going to start being concerned about the makeup of their family. And then the pictures start to get even more frightening. Look at this one. What does this one say, RFM?
This is somebody's mom right there who's having a migraine of all migraines.
Look in the background, those shadowy figures and their hands.
Over here. I'm sorry. I was over there
actually, I can read it at that level. Yep. It says, in this vision, Joseph and Sydney also saw where the people who were most wicked will go. Well, what's most wicked to a little kid? What are you hearing at church? Again, very problematic and confusing. They will be with Satan. There it is. They said it. Some of your family, maybe you, are going to be with Satan. Okay, that's terrifying. They cannot be with Heavenly Father, Jesus, or the Holy Ghost. So they spelled it out right there. This is a cartoon series for little kids. Okay.
Well, at least we're not burning like a rasher of bacon forever.
No. Can you make this a little bigger? Here's where it gets really weird. Okay. I'm not making this up. I showed this to someone who thought I had made these cartoons. I did not make these. Okay. The people who will be with Satan learned about Jesus and his gospel while they were on earth. The Holy Ghost testified to them about Jesus Christ. They knew that he lived and that he died for us. But, right? So here's a picture of people that don't believe in Jesus, right? They know better. And so what do? According to this cartoon, the atheists, I guess, hike their pants up halfway their waist, grab a 2x4 and start beating the shit out of people. That's what they do. Look at that picture.
That's Buford Pusser.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Anyway, tall.
So,
no way, Meryl.
A lot of us have laughed really hard at this 2x4, right? I mean, seriously. But, I can just picture the kid going, Mom, what is this? So it says they denied the truth and denied God's power. They denied the Holy Ghost. They said they did not believe in Jesus anymore. These people will suffer forever. And again, I feel like a child might look at that and go, well, my aunt who I love, she doesn't go to church. Is she someone that's going to suffer forever? And this is the pushback that I got. I posted this and some of my thoughts on it. And a lot of people said, a kid would never think that. And then I had a ton of people weigh in and say, oh, I thought that when I was little.
Yes.
I had an uncle that drank coffee. I thought that. So it's very interesting how they get really polarized. So then I did something, of course.
By the way,
yes,
if you go back to that for a second.
Yeah. The guy beating the, out of the, and why are his pants up to
I'm
here?
trying to figure out what is the story that's being told here in the pictures, right? Because here's the guy in the brown.
Right.
And he is walking away from church leaders who are on the stand, who are speaking God's truth, right?
Right.
And that woman in the purple is going to be the woman in green over here, probably.
Right.
But let's just focus on the guy in brown because we know about him, right? He's saying, no, I don't want anything to do with these Mormon teachers up there talking about that gospel of Jesus Christ. And the next thing you know, you got Buford T. Pusser taking a crack at his face with a Louisville Slugger.
Now that's interesting. I never thought of it that way. It's possible that the guy in the brown is the atheist. You're right. He has been seen before. And so who is this guy? Well, he's his home teacher. He's going to beat some sense into him. Of course, that's who he is.
And I don't know what that woman's doing there, or if that's the same woman. I have no idea.
I think that could be
the guy taking his woman away because of plural marriage. I don't know. All I know is that there seems to be a direct connection between walking out of a church meeting and getting your head bashed in.
I think that the woman in green could be the guy with the bat's wife going, "Get him, honey, get him. He doesn't believe in Jesus." That's who it could be.
I know
Anyway.
this guy, Buford T. Pusser, once again, is the hero.
I don't know, but I'll show you something I found just like an hour ago. It just popped up. Okay. So of course, then what I did is what I always do. And I made my own cartoon to illustrate the point, right? Now, when I first posted it, I posted it without my disclaimer. For satirical purposes only, not an official LDS cartoon. Apparently, my cartoons hit too close to home because people can't tell the difference. Now, I will tell you that these pictures and this cartoon were taken down and removed from ex-Mormon Reddit because they said it pushed the envelope.
Wow.
Do you
Well,
want to
you do have
read?
it kind of framed in such a way as to make it look like it's a screen grab from the church.
That's what I mean. It's too good. But I thought it was so satirical that people would obviously get it. What it proves is that it's too close to the truth. So do you want to read that, RFM? It's a little too small for me.
Grandpa was never baptized a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Grandpa also drinks coffee and tea, which is against the word of wisdom. Grandpa will suffer forever, too, unless you find a way to share the gospel with him.
See, and I feel that is what would be in a child's mind. And a lot of people that commented on my post said, yeah, I used to think that when I was a kid. I have to save my aunt, or I have to try to get my brother back to church. Or
I wasn't baptized till I was 18. I had the same thoughts. Are you kidding?
That's what I'm saying.
In my 20s, 30s? Of course. It's not just kids.
It's not just kids. No. So I'm saying that that's one angle of these cartoons that I have a problem with, that they're disturbing and confusing to kids, and they raise all these questions that, as you mentioned before, RFM, they might not necessarily voice to parents. They really might not. They really might just keep them inside and really worry about them. All of us know we did that when we were kids.
I mean, Rebecca, we have a video from General Conference. This a woman's leader, and I can't remember her name. I apologize. She's probably just as happy. I can't remember her name. Who went on in tears about, who was it, her grandmother or somebody who drank coffee?
One drop.
One cup.
One drop.
It's like Maxwell House.
Exactly.
Good to the last drop.
Good to the last drop. And then you'll be with Satan forever.
I know.
All right. So, here's the one side I find them disturbing and confusing to kids. Now, here's the other one. Okay. Oh, let's see. Am I out of order here? Oh, okay. So this is what I found just like an hour before the newscast. There is a new app called the Gospel app for kids. I'm actually a beta tester. I probably won't be after tonight because they'll figure out it's me and they'll kick me out. But this afternoon I was a beta tester. And so I was able to look through the app, and it's going to have things like Temple Sacrament, Covenant Path stuff. Again, app for kids. So not reading these stories with parents, but sitting alone, going through the apps and accessing these stories. Okay, it's going to have Book of Mormon, Old Testament. What did I find? It's going to have exactly the story that I just went through with you. And all of those that are found on the church's website are going to be on the app. But the most interesting thing, when I went into the 3 Degrees of Glory story, because I thought, let's look through this and see what's there. They recognized that the picture was problematic and they replaced it. Same text, only this time you've got some gritty looking men with no teeth and a whiskey bottle on the door. So also disturbing, people doing bad things, but nobody's beating anybody senseless with a 2x4. So I don't know.
Wait a second. You're saying that the one on the right, which was there originally, is no longer there, and it was
no,
replaced
I'm not
by the
saying
one
that.
on the left.
The one on the right is on the church's website. This new app for children, someone has removed that picture. Every other picture is the same as the church website.
Okay.
And someone has replaced it with this new picture of this goofy smiling guy and people that are drinking. You can tell they're drinking, and they all have really dark eyebrows and wearing low hats. So somebody
It's just weird. It's like if you don't follow the gospel, you're going to be hitting each other with baseball bats.
That's what and hiking your pants up really high. I don't know what to think. Anyway.
Now, I will say, Rebecca, you don't quite see it all, but that looks like a musket in those four guys. That's
kind of firearm.
Yeah.
Well, we'd all like to see
good.
We'd all like to see a little more musket fire in our kids' cartoons, right? That's part of it. So, all right. The other cartoon that I posted was this one. And again, people point these out to me, send them to me, or I find them myself. A lot of people are digging into these things. So this is in the story about Joseph and Emma and their love story. So this is another problem I have with these cartoons. The first, of course, was confusing, scary messages. So this is just one panel from it. It says, the Lord taught Joseph about eternal marriage. Through the power of the priesthood, a man and woman can make a covenant with the Lord. If they keep their covenants, the Lord promises that their marriage will last forever. This is called being sealed. Soon, Joseph and Emma were sealed for eternity. Now, you can probably guess the problem that I had with just simply saying soon, Joseph and Emma.
That soon can cover a lot of ground.
That soon is covering a lot of ground. So, of course, I had to make this is what they should do. This is a sin of omission. I got to add the details that need to be there, right? So here it is. But before Joseph and Emma were sealed together, Joseph was sealed to about 22 other wives. It was hard for Emma to wait in the line behind so many others, but she had faith to do hard things. Joseph was sealed to more wives after he was sealed to Emma too. Emma kept doing hard things. So the sin of omission, the sin of what you're leaving out, to me, is the biggest problem of all of these things. And I came across, yes.
Rebecca?
Yes.
I thought you were going to say it was hard for Emma to wait in line behind so many others, but it's okay because she didn't know about most of them.
I probably should have added that.
Just an idea.
There's so much there. How can you possibly fill in those gaps, right? How can you? But, it just made me think of these quotes by President Oaks, and this is the last part that I'll talk about. So in an address to BYU Law School in 1993, he, and RFM, you covered this very well with Jonathan Streeter in an episode. I think it was a part 1 and a part 2. This is very important. I was glad I found these quotes
so
back.
Much lying. It was so much lying. It took 2 episodes to cover it all.
2 episodes to cover all the lying. No, this is really important. And I'm glad I found the quote back because I know I can use it over and over. In the matter of lying, says President Oaks, the essential question is not whether we have a duty to tell the truth and nothing but the truth. We clearly have that duty. We must not lie. I know of no category of justified lies. The difficult question is whether we are morally responsible to tell the whole truth, right? Oh my gosh, I almost died when I read that. Yeah. So when we have the duty to disclose, we are morally responsible to do it. When there is no duty to disclose, we have 2 alternatives. We may be free to disclose if we choose to do so, but there will be circumstances where commandments, covenants, or professional obligations require us to remain silent.
It sounds like there's a lot of places where we can lie and get away with it.
Yeah, well, and interesting that they don't consider telling the church about the truth about church claims and truth history as a duty to disclose. That is not a duty in their mind. He goes on to say it requires a sophisticated analysis of the circumstances and a finely tuned conscience to distinguish between the situation where you are obliged by duty to speak and the situation where you are obliged by duty, commandment, or covenant to remain silent. So that's my problem with the cartoons.
Look at how he frames finding different ways that you can lie and be okay with God.
Yeah.
As sophisticated analysis and a finely tuned conscience.
Yeah.
When actually it's the exact opposite.
Yeah. I'm just not going to say it. No, he wants you to think of this, finely tuned, the wheels turning, got to figure it out. So anyway, that's why I think I'll still keep looking at the cartoons because, they leave things out for children. Anyway, that's all I have on that. I think now we move on to Bill, don't we?
All right. It's a good thing we only have 200 slides.
Do you know what? This was a big news day, and I'm hoping that everyone's sticking with us because there's a lot of good stuff.
They are sticking with us. We've got a record number of people here tonight.
Oh, good.
I think it's a record for the newscast.
872 people. I don't know if it's a record, but it's one of the higher ones that we've had for sure. 872 folks here. We appreciate all of you being here. Hope you're enjoying the Mormon Newscast. As we sort of work towards wrapping up, the Widow's Might came out with a new report. RFM, do you want to, before I go into this, do you want to share that we're going to go into more detail on this at some later point?
Absolutely. So on Mormonism Live, which goes up live, as the name would indicate, on Wednesday evenings at 6:10 p.m. Mountain Time, 6:20 p.m., on Wednesday evenings Mountain Time. On January 22nd, we're going to have an expert on the show. It's Spencer Anderson, Professor Anderson, from a university deep in the heart of Indiana, who's going to talk to us about what this report means and explain to us, people like me, who's a layperson and doesn't really understand a lot of the lingo, what the implications are and what the interpretation is.
Yeah. So tonight I'll just go through a few of these, more of a surface level, and we'll leave it to him to expound on it in depth. So I'll just note, I put a few of these slides up. I'll just note here on the left, at the year end 2024, the LDS Church investment reserves, again, a few years ago, we were saying 150 billion. The Widow's Mite now estimates the church's investment total at $206 billion.
Can I tell you, they had a big New Year's Eve party at the EPA.
Yeah. The next slide to the right there, we estimate that the church's total wealth increased by 28 billion in 2024 alone to 293 billion total dollars. Again, what we had been saying maybe a year ago was that they had 150 billion minimum in the stock market, in investments in various markets across the globe. They had another $100 billion or so in property and other investment things that are not stock market sort of related. The total today is $293 billion. On the left-hand side here, total charitable expenditures. I just want to note they're spending, it looks like 950 million total. So I just want to note that we've often seen years past where Elder Oaks said we were doing $40 million in humanitarian aid. The church is to the point where it is doing upwards, it shows, is $950 million being used in church welfare, potentially contingent when someone comes into a bishop's office and they're asking for help. And then humanitarian aid, I'm going to make this one bigger just so I can see that. And I'm actually going to go into my slides where I can see them a little better as well. Humanitarian aid, $650 million estimated for 2024, $500 million in 23, $193 million in 22, $108 million back in 21. So the church is increasing year over year the amount of money it does good with in the world. I just want to note that 650 million compared to 293 billion in what they have. They are doing things, but they're not doing much with what they've got.
And as is usual for the church, the only reason they're doing it is because they got exposed for how little they were doing. You'll notice the Widow's Mite report, the first one, the analysis of the LDS Church finances for 2021, shows where that happened. And you'll see it's all pretty even as far as humanitarian aid donations from the year 2000 all the way up to 2020 and then 2021. And now Widow's Mite blows open the windows on what the church's finances really look like and how little they're donating. The next year, they almost double. The next year, they double it. And we've got to wait now to see what it is they do for 2024. If they're going to do it again. Now, is that 2024, that gray line, is that being reported as that much?
I think that's their estimated amount that they believe last year contained.
Okay, so it's not doubling, at least according to their estimate. It's going up, which is all good. So as I think anybody at the Widow's Mite would say, the church doing more in humanitarian aid is a good thing, full stop. But it also looks like the reason they're doing more, historically, they've only done a little bit. And then finally, when it's made public, like they didn't want to have happen, which is why they keep it hidden, now they're starting to respond and give more humanitarian aid.
Yeah.
The windows of heaven opening. We all hear that, and it's supposed to be God that opens them. Not at all. It's people on the outside shaming them and saying, you got to do better because we are all watching.
Yeah. When they got caught, not with their hand in the cookie jar, but hiding the cookie jar in the closet so none of the kids could even see the cookies. That's when they started to spend an increasing amount in humanitarian aid. Yes. Okay. So the next one, I just want to note, I think this one is interesting. The one on the left, just note that the investments, the amount of money they have gets bigger and bigger. But notice that the cost of church operations has gone down. Notice that the money spent on the education system, BYU and CES, is a thinner, there's a less width there in that blue than there is further back in years. Same thing with member welfare. The people who come to see the bishop for help, they're getting less help today than in the past. In other words, the church is making more and more money And it's also saving costs by tightening its belt in every area. You talk about hoarding money, that's what it looks like. The one on the right, just to note, the LDS Church wealth appears to be growing far faster than its ability to deploy resources. In the past 5 years, a $70 billion increase in LDS investment reserves. Over that same amount of time, an $8 billion increase in new temple backing and humanitarian aid. So what the church is spending is going up, but it's going up at a exponentially lower rate than the amount of investments are going up. In other words, every year they have way more money at their disposal than they had the year before. Okay. One on the left, in a generation, the LDS Church could be worth $1 trillion. Again, we went from 150 billion to 206 billion in like 3 or 4 years. It's crazy. So what they are estimating is that conservative estimates say by 2045 and aggressive estimates say by as early as maybe 2042, the LDS Church, if everything stays on pace, will reach $1 trillion in investments in the markets across the globe. All right. The one on the right here.
It'd be a shame if Jesus came back and ruined the fun.
Yeah, it would, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and he might come back earlier now that we possibly won't have the Olympics. So who knows?
The LDS Church's, on the one on the right, the LDS Church's endowment fund is more capable than ever. An endowment invested reserves are sufficient to fund church programs forever, even if donations stop completely. The church has so much money that, barring a financial collapse of the stock market, the church has enough money that it could stop collecting any more and just live off the interest, and it would have enough to fund the church forever. That to me is a big insight into the data. Okay.
It is. And by the way, so everybody knows what an endowment fund means. It just means that you have a huge fund of money, and that principal, the amount of money you've got in that endowment fund, remains the same because you never take any of it out. But it's all invested in some way or other. So it makes interest, right? So the purpose and the beauty of an endowment, if you got a big old endowment, is to only use the interest for what it is you want to use. And it's like a cornucopia. It's going to continually produce that interest because you're never going into the principal.
You could also think of the church's total investment strategy as a much larger example of what they did with the perpetual education fund. Everything to them is just like the perpetual education fund. Let us get enough money and then never touch that. We'll just use the interest, but we'll use so little of the interest that we'll actually have more money the next year anyway.
This is like the optimal way to finance things. Maybe there's something better, but I don't know of it.
Yeah, and I just want to note on the right-hand side, one of those things said, for instance, that there is enough to fund the wards forever. And then the next one says even more than that. Notice there on the bottom left, if we divide the amount of church money in investments divided by the wards that exist, there's $13.4 million per ward. Now, they give the young women like $178, and they give the young men $380 to spend for the year. But there's enough money held by the church in investments that if they were to stop right now today and divide it all up and hand it over to the wards equally, every ward would get $13.4 million. That's U.S. wards, by the way. And then $925,000 per U.S. ward in annual investment profits. Every year, each ward's worth is getting $925,000 in investment profit.
Right.
That to me, crazy. Then the one on the right, misconception, members cleaning chapels is pointless and penny pinching. We all, on this side of things, criticize the LDS Church for having fired the janitorial staff. The Widow's Mite estimates that it would cost the church between 200 to 300 million per year to have a janitorial staff clean the buildings. And while they spend about $1 billion to support BYU each year, the janitorial staff would be equal to about 20 to 30% of that. And so it isn't nothing. It's something. It's just to note that they have so much money, they could easily afford to do this. So there's that. And then I'll just note here, this one I thought was very interesting. I think this is the last slide. The one on the left, again, the church is claiming that it is as strong as ever, that it is experiencing miraculous, is their words, miraculous growth at the current moment. But what the Widow's Mite says is that in countries where we know what the tithing data is, Canada, UK, Netherlands, Australia, and New Zealand, those countries mandate certain types of reporting that allow us to have a glimpse into what tithing year to year or funds raised year to year to the LDS Church. And what it shows is that in every one of those, tithing collection is down. 16% in Canada, down 16%, down 6% in the UK, down 12% in the Netherlands, 4% in Australia, 10% in New Zealand. You can bet that on some level, the US is experiencing that sort of similar trend as well.
Yes.
So while the LDS Church is claiming they are experiencing miraculous growth, the only way that would make sense is if it is in developing countries, like places in Africa, where the church has lauded its success. And I just want to note that in the countries that we would tend to look to as having the LDS Church as a stable presence for decades and decades, if not over a century, indicators in those places seem to show a decline. And so there is a discrepancy between how excited the church seems to be about its numbers and what the Widow's Mite is saying about the numbers that are forced by the church to be shared. And then lastly, we've talked about this several times on the newscast led by Rebecca. There is a backlog in temples. You can see there, you two, and to the audience, the ability to get these temples built hasn't really changed much. And Rebecca, you pointed to that from Lori Lee Hall, stating such. They're just showing that the backlog is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. They are announcing temples at exponential rates. They're breaking ground for some of them, a third of them, but then they're still only able to dedicate essentially the same number they did 10 years ago. So it'll be interesting to see how the church catches up here. To me, the biggest insight here is how fast the church's total and reserve is growing. When you look at, not too long ago, it was 150 billion, and it's gone up 50%.
It's going up to 206 billion.
Yeah.
Once you get to a certain point, you can't stop it. Nothing will stop it. And it will just, it's like a perpetual motion machine.
Nothing
and
like
they're already at
compound
that point.
interest.
It's
A compound
eternity.
interest, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it is eternity. The church is right. There is eternity, and it's their money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we gave it to them, because we thought it was the right thing to do.
My parents put so much money into the perpetual education fund. So much.
Can you? I'm sorry. Were you done with that, Rebecca?
Yeah, I was just shaking my
know you
head, having a
I'm
moment,
sorry.
being triggered. Sorry.
That's okay. So here's the deal, because I think that's really important, and you spent a little time on it over there on the left. Why is it that in every country that we've got reports from, only because it's mandated by law, because the church doesn't report this stuff unless they're absolutely required to by the laws of the country, all right? Why is it that if the church is telling the truth and they're getting more and more members added on the rolls of the church, because they're just converting and flocking, okay, to the church. Those would be new tithe payers, in addition to everybody else who typically we would expect are continuing to pay their tithes and go about their Mormon lives, right? If that's true, why are the tithe amounts going down across the board? 16% in Canada, which may be the closest analog to the United States. It's also a very high number. 10% is around the average here. Going down 10%. The reason that's going down isn't because new members are joining the church. It's because old members are leaving the church. And if there are any members joining the church, it's small in comparison to the size of the number of the members leaving, and they're taking their tithing with them.
Yeah. The only other way to explain the data is that while people still go and they have a testimony, they just don't pay their tithing. They're not that invested in the full gospel plan. And either of those is really bad news for the LDS Church.
Yes. Which is why they're going whole hog in Africa.
Whole hog. And I will tell you about Africa. The reason the church is growing and they're joining is pathways. Yeah, we're going to hear more about that. It's very interesting. So that's a little teaser tidbit. But I was going to say about not paying tithing, but still attending. That is one of the first things. I think the first thing that happens is people say, I've decided it's okay if I don't take a calling. I'm taking back some autonomy. I'm still going to attend, but I'm not going to say yes to everything. And then the next thing they say, and this is from me getting emails from people and talking to people that are, in a faith crisis. The next thing they say is, you know what, I think that we're not going to pay our tithing. It's always that they're going to be able to say no, and then they're going to be able to stop paying money. And so those people still attend, but they've taken those steps of autonomy. And of course, probably the trajectory, we know where that is. But I think that's why you still have people attending, yet they're not paying. So
those folks would be the secular first folks.
That's it. There we go. Yeah.
So are there new chapters out for a new book,
Yes,
even while President Nelson is still with us?
Yes, I see that Latter Daily Digest made a joke about now we're trying to hit the record for time. As I said, it was a very newsworthy week. We even whittled down other stories. But very quickly, you guys are probably familiar, if you look on the right-hand side, those teachings of the prophets, right? Do you remember those when they were introduced in the 90s? And you would go through a manual and read all those words. And the prophets had passed away. And you were able to enjoy again those wonderful words of the prophet. Well, amazingly now, President Nelson, who, as far as we know, has not passed away,
allegedly.
Well, there was that short I put out where on Family Search he's listed as have died, but that turned out to not be right.
It's hard to tell the difference sometimes.
Yeah, it is what it is. Anyway, his teachings are being put out while he's still alive. So a few months ago, let's see, it says, hold on. Since 1997, the church has published a collection of teachings of each of the 17 prophets who have served as president. This is the first time that these collections to be published in part while a prophet is still yet alive. And so 4 chapters were published several months ago. We've got 6 new chapters now. And, they're just your typical things, weighing in on the different things. But again, I really do question the purpose of any of these manuals anyway, because did no one get the memo about the comic books and the classic cars and all of that? I mean, it really seems like maybe all they should have or be able to have are the words of a living prophet. Somebody pushed back on me about a post about this and said, well, they only started doing it in 97. True. So only 2 prophets, Hinckley and Monson, did not have the opportunity while living to have their teachings, published. So maybe this is the trend going forward. Maybe Dallin Oaks, when he takes over the reins, will also have his teaching published. And it may be true because I remember the first manual. I guarantee there's some problematic things in a lot of those manuals. So I think they really want you to focus on the words of the living prophets over these manuals or the scriptures or anything else.
Well, when Elder Oaks has his manual, I want to make sure on the cover there's a picture of Elder Oaks and also next to him, Beaker. Okay, just his lab assistant, Beaker. Honestly, 6 chapters, I have heard everything that President Nelson has said. It's not that great, folks. Really?
Well, I will tell you, I read everything. And you know what I was looking for? Can you guess what I was looking for? I was looking for the airplane. And I was looking for the gun with the trigger pulled. I did not find it, not yet, because
Well,
I
that was
wanted
the
to.
last conference, right?
Well, I
In
mean,
October.
that story has been told over and over and over.
I mean, he
So
did tell that story again in abbreviated form about
Yeah.
the incident at Mozambique.
yes, and this time he said the loaded gun, the trigger was pulled. So I would like to know if they are going to canonize and immortalize those stories that have been proven over and over through the Deseret News's own story and through so much forensic research not to have happened. If they are going to go ahead and canonize those in that manual, I'd be very curious. So,
No lady in a red hat. No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So check them out. All right. So
It's almost as if President Nelson has a habit of telling stories about himself that he exaggerates to make himself look, I don't know, better than he is, more spiritual than he is,
who would do that?
more
I mean,
amazing
honestly.
than he is.
Who would do that? No one would do that. Oh, I did
It's like
include a slide. Here
it's
are
like
some
we
of
got
the
Frank
titles.
Burns leading the church.
Yeah, here are some of the titles very quickly, but you guys can find them anywhere, your gospel app, your gospel library. Okay, so very quickly, as we end here, there are a couple things coming up in the Mormon media moment that I wanted to make sure, that's hard to say altogether, that everybody caught because they're coming out this week. Okay, so here is a documentary on Netflix. It is a documentary that tracks a BYU graduate's efforts to live forever. No, this is not about President Nelson. This is someone else. It's called Don't Die, The Man Who Wants to Live Forever. And apparently it's kind of a creepy yet interesting, like you can't look away kind of a documentary. It says every day he engages in hyper-regimented body care routine that will, in theory, help him maintain the physical condition of someone much younger than his years. He is 47. This Too Chummy documentary promoted on his website offers the more familiar reverse sensation of having 90 minutes of your life taken away from you. This reviewer did not appreciate this documentary. By the time it's over, you will be older. A progression that, if anything, the movie feels like it hastens. So check it out. BYU, LDS. He is literally, I think, attempting to resurrect himself, right? And create his own perfect body that will never die. So we might pick up some health tips. I don't know. I think you have to be a millionaire to do it.
Elder Bednar's found his own way to do that, but it involves shedding his skin.
Okay, there is that. All right. And then widely anticipated and wildly anticipated American Primeval, everybody. This is coming out on January the 9th. So this weekend. And it is the story of the Old West, but Brigham Young, Mountain Meadows Massacre, and the state of Utah, kind of the police state of Utah. And we're all extremely curious to watch this and see exactly what it's going to be. So
Have you noticed what they changed?
On this picture?
Mm-hmm.
Do they not have the bodies hanging there anymore?
The body is not hanging there anymore underneath the flag.
Yeah, I'm probably guessing that maybe the church said, take that down.
I think it was after I made the comment that it looked like Moroni.
That's what I'm saying. You're
Flying
being
in the
watched.
midst of heaven,
That's it.
having the everlasting gospel to preach to every nation, kindred,
That's-
tongue, and people.
that's
Revelation
it.
chapter 14, verse 6. Look it up.
There it is. Anyway, everybody watch. Please comment. Let us know. Go to the Mormon Newscast website. Let us know what you think of this because I'm really curious. I'm hoping that it's going to tell some raw and real truth about that era that is often not disclosed at all, especially the Mountain Meadows Massacre. So, and that's all I have. I think there we are. We're done.
Excellent. So
Wow.
let's turn some time over to you guys to quickly share anything coming up in the various content platforms that we create things. Rebecca, I'll start with you.
Yeah, well, I already mentioned that on Tuesday night, tomorrow night at 6 p.m., we will be interviewing trumpet professor who has left BYU, Jason Bergman. He is an incredible human being. I'm not kidding. I dare you to watch it without crying and feeling his sincerity and just understanding from someone who was on the ground and slowly went through the process and just realized step by step what was happening and his complete sadness for his colleagues and his students. And it's just incredible. 6 p.m. Mountain Time. And one more thing, the Good Book Club this Sunday, we have been reading Second Class Saints and we have Matt Harris joining us. If you have wanted to ask Matt a question in person, just message me. You can it's a Zoom link. He's going to be with us for 2 hours answering questions one-on-one about Second Class Saints. We tape all our book club meetings, the Good Book Club. So if you don't catch it, you can catch it later. I'll put it out. But if you really want to talk to him, he's going to answer questions from anybody that's on there Zooming with him. And we're going to talk about Second Class Saints. That is Sunday. And that is at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. And you have to have a Zoom link. So just message me or reach out and I will get you that link.
Excellent. RFM?
This Wednesday on Mormonism Live, we're going to have on not the individual Brian Hales, but a video of him that he's recently released. It's about 9 minutes in length, in which Brian Hales, who, by the way, is actually an apologist for the church, at least so he says, continues to do devastating damage to the church by publishing his opinions about Joseph Smith and where he got his ideas for the restoration of the gospel. It's absolutely amazing. You're not going to believe this stuff that he's put out there. In fact, it's so amazing, so unbelievable that I've already downloaded it in case he gets wise and takes it down from YouTube. We've still got it.
You're saying Brian Hales. Do you mean Terrell Givens?
I do. They kind of look the same. You never see one. You never see them both in the same room together. And you never see Terrell Givens and his wife in the same room together either.
No.
But yeah, I do mean Terrell Givens. Thank you.
Yeah.
And everything I said applies equally. It's Terrell Givens.
They're interchangeable.
Yeah.
They kind of are. These guys are fungible.
And by the way, I just want to note, you just released an episode, if it was yesterday or day before, where you went into the story about a case that you covered because Kwaku and the Midnight Mormons at the time, Word Radio now, Midnight Mormons had made some critical comments about you in terms of the employment that you do as a lawyer, who you had defended, what work you had done, and you go into length about that case. Do you want to mention just the title and suggest anything about that?
Sure. It's called The Case of the Boy Who Killed His Little Sister. And it talks about what I did in representing that individual and why I did it and what happened. And it raised quite a ruckus. And there's a number of clips in there from local news agencies who covered the story back in 2017. So I wanted to give the behind the scenes story of what it was that Kwaku was talking about. And I play the clip of that first to establish it.
Yeah. And then I'll just note Mormonism After Dark will be on Friday at 8 p.m. We'll look forward to seeing folks there who want to have a little more laid back, maybe a little more off the cuff sort of conversation. We do appreciate live callers and folks showing up in the studio. We give the link out. You can show up in the studio and share your thoughts on Friday for Mormonism After Dark, starting at 8 p.m. Mountain Time. Thank you to both of you for the work you put into getting your stories ready. And for everybody who tuned in to the Mormon Newscast, we appreciate your support of the show. And anything else you guys want to say? Otherwise, I'll close it out.
Nope, that's good.
All right. 8:12 p.m. We're out of here. We'll see everybody next week, next Monday, 6 p.m. Mountain Time for the Mormon Newscast. Have a exceptional night.
Gordon B. Hinckley here. That's a wrap for this week's edition of the Mormon Newscast. We appreciate you tuning in and sharing this time with us. Keep the conversation going and stay informed on all things Mormonism. Until next week, wishing you peace and joy. See you next Monday at 6 p.m. on the Mormon Newscast. And remember, Mormon was a good word before it was a bad one. #Hinckley was a